Nezha 2, 10-second review. Pretty movie, might be worth seeing for the visuals alone, but the plot is a 15-car pile-up. It's kinda hard to look away. 7 out of 10. So recently this movie has been making some waves in the news because it made like $1 bajillion off the fact that China just has a lot of freaking people, and they took advantage of one of the biggest holiday seasons in the Lunar New Year. So that probably leaves a lot of people from the outside looking in, unfamiliar with Chinese mythology, thinking, hey, what's going on with this Chinese animated film starring this little gremlin child? For those of you who are entirely unfamiliar, the simplest comparison I could probably draw is something like the Hercules movie from Disney. It's based off really old myths and deities, but the story is heavily changed and made more age-appropriate. So you don't have things like Zeus coming down from heaven and turning into a really sexy swan so you can get it on with a lady who clearly is down really bad. But hey, the movie has a scene where everyone sits down to drink Nezha's pee, so I think there's still a couple different cultural standards of what's appropriate for kids. Now before I get into talking about the movie too much, I'm assuming most of my supposed audience I have is, well, non-existent. But if I had an audience, they are probably Americans and other, quote, Westerners, unquote, because I am speaking official American language.
I don't understand a word you just said. Try speaking American, it's the only language I understand.
But for the record, I do in fact speak Chinese fluently enough so that I didn't really need to look at subtitles while watching this movie. Anyway, my point is just that I'm looking at this movie mostly from the view of someone outside the culture, so if you are Chinese and you're just tearing your hair out because I didn't get it or I didn't pick up on some deep-hitting galaxy brain commie messaging, then, well, that's why. You're only going to get capitalist pig critiques here. Deal with it. So I actually have seen a couple of the newer Chinese animated movies that have been coming out the past few years. I watched Monkey King, Hero is Back, and it was pretty, but I didn't think the story was that great. I saw White Snake, which was also pretty, but I didn't think the story was that great. And then of course I saw Nezha 1, which was really pretty, but I didn't think the story was that great. So here comes Nezha 2 with all its bluff and bluster being all like, hey, fuck you, my animation is even better, and my story is even worse. Now obviously I'm being sarcastic there, but that kind of encapsulates my feelings on the movie. The animation is very, very impressive, but the story has a lot of problems. But I really do want to emphasize the pretty part of my critique because this movie is a visual treat. It's not just the animation quality itself that is impressive, but also there's just these big set pieces and really elaborate action scenes that are paired with a really great use of color. When they have the humanoid characters fighting, there's just like this really beautiful flow to the way they move, whether they're using martial arts moves or they're using their powers, and it all blends together very well. If you're familiar at all with the golden age of Chinese animation, this is very reminiscent of that style, which is something I really appreciate because it does give the film its own unique identity separate from something I'd see from Western or Japanese animation. If all you've seen of this movie is the trailer, then it really doesn't showcase just how great the movie looks. Which I guess is kind of a good thing because nowadays a common complaint is that movie trailers show off way too much, but I just wanted to note that in case you've only seen the trailer and you were left unimpressed. This is one of those movies I think I'll come back to just to see certain scenes over and over just because of how good they looked, but I don't think I'd ever watch this thing from start to finish again. And that brings me to my next point, which is that this movie was an overstuffed behemoth of a film. It is completely exhausting to sit all the way through. It has a runtime of 144 minutes, which is honestly insane for an animated movie. But even with that runtime, many parts felt very rushed and underdeveloped. I get the impression that after the first Nezha movie, which was actually a very simple plot, the creators had 5 different ideas for what they wanted to happen in a sequel, and they just decided to do all of them. The movie was also very melodramatic at times, which I'm not even really holding against it because that's a fairly common Asian drama thing, especially with C-dramas when they have fantasy. But combining that with the overstuffed plot really hurt this movie. I think the easiest way for me to describe it would be to say that it was like sitting down and watching an entire season of a C-drama stuffed into about 2.5 hours. Most notably, I think there's a number of character moments for the leads that really suffer under these constraints, because often they involve minor characters who only come in for that one scene, or they don't really have much of a role in the movie at all, and they try to center these big emotional moments around them. Now, I want to elaborate on that a little bit, but for me to do that, I'm going to have to get into spoilers for the movie. So I guess there's your warning for the spoiler section of the movie. Final call, 3, 2, 1. So there's a lot of character deaths in this movie. Actually, if you stop to think about it, there's a bunch of characters who are basically gag characters. They did like a 5-second gag earlier in the movie, and they also died at some point in the movie, unless they retcon this in the next entry, because basically the entirety of Chenton Pass dies, which is honestly really crazy for a kids movie. Hey kids, you know those cute buddies that came up and said they were Nezha's fan club near the beginning of the movie and they did a little joke with them? Well, they're dead, you little shit. Everyone is dead. Now, that's actually not a problem I had with the movie, but if I had one big example of how the movie feels like it's doing too much, it's the focus on the death of Lady Ying at the end of the movie. I have two problems with this. First, this comes not that long after the movie did that part where Chenton Pass is shown to be mostly dead. So they already did a fake out death with this character just maybe 20 minutes before. But second, her death comes very late in the movie, and it functions as essentially one of the emotional climaxes in the movie. And basically it's the emotional climax for Nezha as well. Despite the fact that Lady Ying, it really isn't much of a character through most of this movie. In fact, most of the times the movie went back to Chenton Pass to show what the characters were doing. It was actually mostly Li Jing doing stuff and solving problems with Shengongbao, and not Lady Ying. So they actually had several moments that they could have had this character do something more so that her death mattered more at the end of the movie, but they just didn't. And I do feel like that is a symptom of this movie just trying to do way too much. So that's probably my biggest criticism of this movie. I actually cared a lot more when Shengongbao died because he was actually a character, and he had character development in the movie. And to me, this is just the biggest example of something that kind of permeates the entire movie. The other thing I want to mention here is not really a critique of the movie's quality, but just the basic concept of the gods ending up being the villains in this movie. I think this kind of goes with this new depiction of Aobing as this pretty bishy husbando who is BFFs with Nezha. This isn't exactly something new or recent. I've seen a number of works out of China that reimagine old stories and characters as essentially almost complete opposites of what their classic forms are, or at least they were reinterpreted with a modern lens. So, for example, I've seen this with adaptations of Romance of the Three Kingdoms or Louis Cha novels. They're constantly changing these stories to be a little bit different than the last time they've been adapted. I just think it's kind of an interesting thing to observe about these Chinese stories compared to the classic depictions they might have had just a few decades back. It's kind of an interesting topic all by itself, so maybe I'll just talk about that in a separate video sometime. Anyway, that's just some thoughts I had on Nezha 2. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. And if for some reason you heard my spoiler-filled rant and you still want to see the movie, might I suggest never checking out the English dub. There was actually an English dub for the first Nezha, and while the acting is fine, the way they say Nezha in the movie just drives me crazy, and I think that alone disqualifies the movie as a worthwhile dub to watch.
Nezha! That'll be enough of that.